Shevi'i of Parshas Beshalach brings us once again to the major theme that we have been talking about that develops throughout Shevi'i in the first 6 parshiot of Shemot. And that is the awareness and understanding and knowledge of the closeness of God to us, of God not having abandoned his creation, the idea that the makot of Mitzrayim and the function of the Jewish people are to know, the mandat to know, Ki Ani Hashem, that I am God, the God of Yud Kei Vav Kei, who has not abandoned the world. And that knowledge of God is not merely, if you will, academic knowledge, facts that just are, but rather in its most fundamental way, that through this kind of knowledge we come to the other aspect, which is represented by the word to know in Hebrew, and that is we come to love God. Through being witness to God's creations, being witness to God's actions in the world, we come to love God. And so too, we follow in this the Ramban throughout, especially the Ramban that we saw last week at the end of Parshas Bo, and the Rambam in Mishnah Torah in the second Perek of Hilchot Yesodei HaTorah, where he describes how one comes to love God through the knowledge of God. This attachment to God, which we call love, is something that is not of mere interest. It is critical to my stance in life. The certainty of this and the experience of it is critical. And in Shevi'i of Parshas Beshalach, we come to the challenge, because Parshas Beshalach in Shevi'i, we meet after the Jews have come out of Mitzrayim, after Kriyas Yam Suf, etc., etc. The Jews are in a place called Refidim. Vayovo Amalek. Amalek comes. Vayilochem im Yisrael b'Refidim. And he goes to war with Israel in Refidim. In Refidim. And this war, represented by Amalek, is a fundamental war, the way it's understood by Chazal, about an understanding of the place, if you will, of man in the universe, and the very existence of God, or the very relationship of God to the world. And so Amalek, the Balei Rishumot said, Amalek, what did Amalek do? Amalek begins to cast doubt in this certainty, in this dot of a God. Amalek is perhaps the spirit of denial or doubt. Perhaps there is a God who created the world, but he has no interest in the world. He doesn't relate to people, and so on and so forth. Be it as it may, it takes many shapes. But Amalek in Gematria, the numerical value of Amalek, is the same as the numerical value of Safek, of doubt. So Amalek is the one who casts doubt. Doubt that challenges the knowledge, the profound and emotional and basic knowledge of Leman Das Ki Ani Hashem. That is the Ramban, for example. The Ramban says that the meaning of, we saw this at the end of Parshas Bo, the meaning of many mitzvot and the meaning of creation and the meaning of prayer is that people should recognize and proclaim the existence of God. All of the manifest great miracles only point to the fact that the whole world, all of so-called nature, is a miracle. And to recognize that is the meaning of all these so many mitzvot, and the meaning of Yetziat Mitzrayim. And so let us go back to the origin of Amalek. And that origin is in Esav. Esav is the progenitor of Amalek. And when we meet Esav, he is coming in from the field, and he's hungry, and he is ready to barter the Bechorah, the firstborn right, which meant the ambassador of the knowledge of God into the world. And he's ready to abandon all of that for what? A mess of porridge. And the Torah emphasizes in Bereshit, in the Parshas Toldos, that not only did Esav sell the Bechorah, transfer the Bechorah to Yaakov, but it ends with the, if you will, the coup de grace. It says, Vayivez Esav et ha-Bechorah. He despised, he denigrated the meaning of the Bechorah. The point of that, of course, is not simply that he sold it as a technical kind of a thing. He sold his birthright, but he negated this mission of knowing God and of teaching the truth of God's place in the world. Which means it wasn't so significant. And that is the same thing as casting a doubt into certainty. That is what Esav did, and that's what Amalek does. And so Chazal say that the emphasis that the Torah has, that all this takes place in Refidim, and it takes place in a place called Refidim. They play on the words, Chazal play on the words Refidim, Vayavo Amalek Vayilachem Im Yisrael Refidim. Amalek comes and struggles and goes to war with Israel in Refidim. It's not simply giving me a geographical location of where the battle took place, but it's giving me an explanation of why Amalek / Esav was able to attack the Jewish people. It's not merely a physical battle, it's a spiritual, intellectual battle. And that is because apparently Am Yisrael, the people Israel themselves, go through times when they are not completely connected to the meaning of their relationship with the Ribono Shalom, with God, which is refracted through the Torah. And Chazal are giving me an idea of how this happens. It happened once, and unfortunately it happens again. If Refidim, it says, Sherafu Yedehem min HaTorah. Their hands grew weak, didn't hold strong to the Torah. Rav Hutner in Pachad Yitzchok on Purim, in the very first entry, the very first ma'amar, notes this expression, and Rav Hutner says precisely, usually when we're talking about not studying Torah, right, we talk about bittul Torah. Bittul Torah is the expression, to nullify the study of Torah, right? Like people say, how come you're not learning? What are you bottling? A mixture between language. And what are you bottling your time in the base medrash? What are you doing? What are you talking about? Like the latest scores in the game. Who's going to win the Super Bowl? You learn the Tosfos. Learn the Rabbi Kveger. That's bittul Torah that you're doing. But here the term is not bittul Torah. It's rafu yidei min Torah. It's not that necessarily we're not connected to Torah, but the connection has grown tenuous. It's not strong. Okay, we don't understand the importance of Torah. We might be learning, but we don't understand the importance of Torah. It's not a significant factor in our lives. The Torah doesn't guide us, isn't that meaningful, and we spend perhaps time learning it, but it's not that important. It's not that important. And this, of course, is the time where we meet Amalek again in Purim. Okay, and therefore, Haman, in a certain sense, presents, and the whole issue of Purim presents, in fact, the challenge of it is said in the name of the Rambam, quoted by the Tzos in his brother's introduction to which Tzos published Kuntras Hasveikos, that in the name of the Rambam, that this writing about how the resolution of doubts, that ein simcha, there is no joy in life like kehatarat hasveikot, like the resolution of doubts. To live in doubt is terrible. There's nothing like coming to the resolution, to come to certainties. Of course, this issue, unfortunately, sometimes cuts the wrong way, because it leads to movements in which great leaders, supposed great leaders, say, oh, we have this certainty, we'll make the decisions for you, this is the subject of Eric Fromm's Escape from Freedom. We can escape from despotism to freedom, or we can escape from freedom. Perhaps we'll talk about this in a later point in time in these presentations on Shevi'i. But in any case, Purim is the height of joy. Purim is the height of joy because it is, right, the simcha v'sason, because Purim represents the battle once again with Haman. When Haman rose up in full fury and threatened to wipe out the Jews and their connection and their understanding and the representation of God in the world, and we did not suffer that terrible fate. There was the resolution of the Safek, and instead Haman was destroyed. And that issue is when we are not fully connected, properly connected to Torah and the message of Torah, so there is a lack of passion. And lacking the passion, we lack the joy. And lacking the joy, the interest grows less and less. The commitment grows less, though we may still be studying it, but we're not passionate about it. We're not joyous about it. There's no simcha of learning. And Purim is that of passion. And so we come again to another pasuk in Shevi'i. And that describes, in Shevi'i, it describes that HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells Moshe this story of the battle with Ksov Zot Zichron B'Sefer. Write as a record of this in a book, in a document. V'sim bozne Yoshua, and put it in the ears of Yoshua. Ki macho emched zecher Amalek, I will destroy the memory of Amalek. Amalek would have you forget God. I will destroy the memory of Amalek. In other words, in the end, the Safek will be negated. And the question is, it says, write it in the book. God says, write it in the book. And then it says, V'sim bozne Yoshua, and put it in his ear. What is that? What is the meaning of that? What's the meaning of it? If it's in the book, it's in the book. What is Sim B'Aznei Yoshua? And there is a teaching of the Baal Shem Tov, you'll find in the Baal Shem Tov al Torah, that what it is, this is the source of why you have to come. It's not enough to learn just from whatever sefer right? It's not enough to learn Sifrei Musar, for example, ethical works. It's not enough to sit down and just learn from a book. You have to come to the tzaddik, and the tzaddik will put it in your ear. You will hear him speak. He will put it into you. Because there is no comparison to what we learn from a book as to what we learn from a person and the example of the person. And of course, this teaching of the Baal Shem Tov is actually a Gemara in Brachos. The Gemara in Brachos says that the Gadol Shimusha Shel Torah, the service of a person who represents Torah, the way he lives his life, is greater than limudah, than the learning of something, than the learning, if you will, of the simple text of reading inside. Okay? It goes even beyond that, because the Baal Shem Tov might be explaining the meaning of Amalek, but the Gemara is saying that the life of the tzaddik, the life of the teacher of Torah, in his living, in his doing, in his walking, in his speech, and in the way he conducts himself, that itself is the living Torah. And the pasuk is quoted because Po Elisha ben Shaphat in Malachim. Here's Elisha ben Shaphat being introduced to the king of Yehuda, right? Being described to the king of Yehuda, Asher Yotzak Mayim al Yedei Eliyahu, who poured water onto the hands of Eliyahu. And the Gemara says, it doesn't say that he learned Torah from Eliyahu, it says that he poured water on his hands. He saw how Eliyahu washed his hands. He saw something that he did. And this is the pasuk of Sim ba'aznei Yehoshua. Okay? And in the Sim of ba'aznei Yehoshua, in being with the representative of Torah, with the one who speaks Torah, one experiences the passion of Torah. Experiences not as dry, experience in a way that it's alive, that it is not being learned or taught or understood with rifyon yadai, but rather with the upraised arms of Moshe Rabbeinu in the battle of Amalek, pointing towards heaven, pointing towards God, representing God in the world. And so, passion, the struggle is, of course, to understand. But the blessing is to understand that real understanding is only that kind of understanding that is allied with love and passion.